dear adventurers. It's Dozing Knight. Welcome back to another quiet evening of shared tales and wandering through worlds unknown. Whether you find yourself nestled among velvet cushions or simply pausing in the hush between busy days, I'm honored to guide you on tonight's journey. Tonight's episode is titled Beneath the Emberlight Tavern, a gentle spin on the intricate, imaginative world of Dungeons and Dragons. Picture an ancient city tucked beneath a tapestry of stars, where alleys weave through shadowed cobblestones and lanterns shed a honeyed glow. There, hidden in the heart of bustling streets, stands the Emberlight Tavern, its windows aglow with promise, its hearth always warm, and its cellars echoing with secrets waiting for curious souls to discover. Our story will follow Elira, a bard with a gentle voice and nimble fingers, who hears rumors of a doorway beneath the tavern, one that leads not just below the velvet-bricked foundation, but perhaps into the city's oldest dreams. Along the way, Elira will find unlikely friends, a gruff dwarven cook with a heart of gold, a half-elf with a mysterious past, and a shy goblin tinkerer who sees magic in the rush of everyday life. Together, they'll face softly lit mysteries. Never danger, but always wonder. Tonight promises gentle discoveries, a touch of enchantment, and the type of companionship that warms the soul as surely as mulled cider on a winter evening. Now, before we begin, I invite you to dream along with the characters. Imagine you too could wander those meandering lanes and slip beneath the tavern's noisy floorboards. If you discovered a hidden place teeming with secrets, who would you hope to meet inside? Perhaps a clever wizard, a kindly innkeeper, maybe a talking cat with riddles tucked between its whiskers. Let me know. I'd love to hear your answer. Your imaginings shape these worlds as much as my words. If this story brings you comfort, or if you'd like to hear more gentle adventures and quiet nights spun into dreams, consider subscribing or following this channel. When you do, you'll be invited back to every fireside, every hush of starlight, and every tale yet to unfold. Let's prepare for tonight's journey. Draw in a slow, steady breath through your nose, feeling the coolness as it fills your chest. Hold for a heartbeat, then let it spill out softly through your lips, as though you're blowing out a candle in a place where magic lingers in every shadow. Relax your shoulders. Allow the weight of the day to slip away, as if you're unbuttoning your adventurer's cloak and letting it fall to the tavern floor. In this space, you are safe. You are at rest. The hour has grown gentle. The tavern's doors are just ahead. Let's press our palms to the wood, feel the heat of the embers inside, and step quietly into the story. The door to the Emberlight Tavern sighed as I slipped inside, a slow breath of warmth rolling over my shoulders, like a shawl fresh from the hearth. Lanterns glowed with that soft honey color I've always loved, and the air smelled faintly of cinnamon-spiced ale and old oak polished by patient hands. I set my loot case on a quiet table near the window, where the glass trembled with a gentle autumn wind. Outside, the village of Dunrow drifted towards sleep, one candle at a time. Inside, chairs murmured on their legs, and the fire crackled in a voice like folded parchment. It felt like the sort of evening that would remember me, even if I forgot it. I tuned the lute by touch, listening for the way each string wanted to rest. The room hummed around me, low conversation, the clink of ceramic mugs, the hushed laughter of friends who knew they would see each other again tomorrow. I began with a simple progression, the sort that feels like smoothing bed linens, like aligning the corners of a quilt, and let it bloom into a lullaby. The tavern softened at the edges. Someone sighed. The barkeep, a round-cheeked woman named Willa, set a steaming cup beside me without asking. Nutmeg, cream, a whisper of something floral. I thanked her with a nod. It was then that the old man at the corner table lifted his head. His hair was the color of winter straw, his coat the faded blue of a long-loved tapestry. "Miss Bard," he said, in a voice that had watched decades drift by like dandelion seeds. "Do you know the Ballad of the Sleeping Dragon?" The name moved through me like a breeze through a wind chime, waking notes I didn't know I owned. "Perhaps," I replied, tasting the syllables. "Or perhaps I knew it once." The old man smiled the way lanterns smile at a traveler lost in a fog. "That's the way of it," he said. "Songs come back when they are needed." I took a slow sip of the drink and let the cup warm my hands. Somewhere in the rafters, a nightbird clicked its soft tongue. I laid my fingers on the strings the way you lay a hand on an old friend's shoulder. The first chord came gentle as rain on leaves. The next unfolded like a letter creased by many readings. I did not remember the melody, and yet my hands moved as though they were following footprints in fresh snow. The room leaned closer. Willa stilled where she stood, cloth in hand, eyes reflecting the hearth. The song that wasn't mine braided itself into the night. I saw, not with my eyes, but with the part of the heart that holds quiet pictures. A cave beneath a hill, and a silence as deep as winter sleep. I smelled cool stone and a hint of iron, like old bells. I felt the rise and fall of a breath larger than a cottage, slower than a tide. The melody curved around a name I could not hear, only feel. A patient, ancient presence. Not cruel, not gentle, simply vast. When I reached for the final cadence, my thumb hesitated, as though there should have been one more thread to weave, a single silver strand to tie the bow. But the tavern exhaled, and the fire settled, and I let the last note dim until it was more memory than sound. The old man lifted his mug. "There," he said softly. "Close enough for tonight." He raised his cup to me, as if to a fellow conspirator in a kindly secret. "Sleep well, Bard." I waited until chairs scraped and the door sighed again and again, releasing the village into its moonlit lanes. Willa wiped a ring of ale from the counter. "Rooms are warm," she offered. "Feather quilts, lavender in the pillows. The Emberlight does its best with wanderers." I smiled. "It seems a place that knows how to hold a hush," I said, and she nodded, pleased. In the room above the common floor, I set the lute at the foot of the bed. The mattress opened beneath me like a friendly moss bank, the kind that remembers the shape of your rest. But even as my eyelids drifted down, I felt the song tug at me, like a child asking if we might read one more page by candlelight. So I sat and tuned again. The D hummed true, the G sighed sweetly. The A flickered, then steadied. I brushed a chord, and the wood of the lute answered, as if it had been waiting all along. That was when the string thrummed on its own, a soft, unprompted vibration, like a cat purring under a hand not yet laid down. I held my breath. The note elongated, became a whisper shaped from resonance and grain. "Elowen," it breathed. My name, spoken by wood and wire. Not frightening, Not even strange, only familiar, as though the lute had had my name in its keeping since before I learned to play. Yes, I whispered to the dark. The window let in a wash of moonlight as pale as milk. The whisper floated there, barely more than movement through the hollow body. Beneath, below, follow the chord you cannot remember. I touched the string again, and the note formed a feeling rather than words. Stairs, a curved passage, a door of light. The sense of things hidden, not to deceive, but to wait for the right hands. For my hands. Tomorrow, I said, a yawn wrapping the word in warmth. In the morning, if the Emberlight is kind. The lute fell quiet, like a candle agreeing to be snuffed so that sleep might come. I lay back. The quilt pressed a comforting weight across me. Through the floorboards, the tavern's last murmurs faded into that deep village silence that always makes me think of a great creature. Not a threat, but a guardian, at rest beneath the earth. The thought made me smile. The breath of the Emberlight and my own breath drifted together, slow wave to slow wave, until the shore of sleep took me in. I dreamed of a stair that curved like a ribbon unspooling from a gift. I dreamed of stone cool against my fingers, and of a gentle glow that did not hurt the eyes. I dreamed of a melody older than my name and kinder than the softest blanket. In the dream, I opened a door, and the door opened me. When dawn arrived, it came in rosewater tones that pooled on the windowsill. Somewhere a baker turned out loaves, and the crusts sang as they cooled. Willa's cat pawed at my door, then decided against conversation and padded away. I rose in a hush that felt ceremonial. The song, the not quite remembered song, sat on my tongue like the first word of a vow. I dressed simply, laced my boots with slow, even pulls, and gathered the lute. Before I left the room, I paused, listening for the whisper. Only the gentle creak of joists, the soft gossip of the morning wind. Yet the sense remained, like the lingering warmth from a hand just lifted. Beneath, below, follow. Downstairs, the tavern was washing itself awake. Sunlight found 1,000 tiny polish marks on the bar and made a quiet, constellated sky. The old man was gone. Willa was carving butter into a neat yellow curl. She looked up and smiled. "Sleep like a stone?" she asked. "Like an old story under a mountain," I answered. Her eyes brightened. Whether at my words or their shape, I could not tell. "Cellars through that door," she said, as if I had asked. "Watch the third step. It likes to pretend it isn't there." It was an odd instruction to give a guest unprompted, and yet it did not feel odd at all. It felt like the softest nudge from a caring hand. I bowed my head in thanks and moved toward the door, letting my fingers brush the lute case, as one would reassure a companion at the start of a quiet journey. The hinges gave a friendly murmur, and a cooler breath of air rose to greet me. On the second step down, I paused and looked back. Willa had already turned to the teapot, but I thought I saw her glance touch the doorway like a blessing. The third step, true to its nature, tried to trick me, and I smiled, caught it, and descended, my soles whispering on the worn wood, my heart steady and slow, as if matching an older, deeper rhythm waiting somewhere below. The cellar welcomed me with that clean, sleepy scent of dry stone and apples dreaming in their bins. Light from a small window pooled onto barrels and burlap like warm cream, and dust motes drifted at a lazy pace, unhurried sprites with no appointments to keep. I closed the door behind me, and the Emberlight's upstairs voices softened into a distant comfort, like a lullaby heard through a bedroom wall. I set the lute on a work table and ran my fingers over the spruce top. The wood had grown more talkative since last night, holding the echo of my name the way a seashell holds the ocean's breath. "I'm here," I murmured, and the whisper rose again, a tone more than a word, vibrating along the grain. Beneath, below, follow the chord you cannot remember. The cellar wasn't large, but it felt like a room that knew about secret angles. Apples sat shoulder to shoulder. A stack of plates rested like moons in eclipse. There was nothing overtly magical here. No obvious sigils, no conscious gleam in the stone. Only the calm orderliness of a place that keeps a household steady. Yet the sense tugged me toward the back wall, where the light did not quite reach, and the chill gathered like a shawl around its shoulders. I hummed the melody from last night, as softly as one hums to a drowsy child. The sound worked its way into the cellar, testing a corner, gliding along a beam. When I reached that hesitant place, the not yet chord, I stopped. The air shifted, like a sleeper rolling toward a warm patch of quilt. "There," I whispered. Not a gap, not a crack, exactly. A listening, as though the wall itself waited on my breath. I brought the lute close and laid my ear against it. The instrument hummed back, string to string, until my fingertips found a quiet, peculiar shape I didn't remember learning. Thumb brushing the bass, ring finger catching a high harmonic, middle and index settled like birds along a wire. I exhaled and let the chord form. It did not ring out. It opened. The tone was so gentle it felt like light on the back of a closed eyelid. The walls stirred, the way dough rises under a warm cloth. Stone became suggestion. Suggestion became passage. Not dramatic, not showy, simply a soft invitation to step through, if I wished. I did not hesitate. I have learned that the oldest doors prefer grace to force. The passage was a spiral, curving down with a patience that suited my steps. My hand skimmed the inner wall, and the stone held a faint warmth, as if the Emberlight's hearth had been breathing on it for years. The air smelled of rain kept for later. Each footfall was a small, assured sound. Banister, breath. Banister, breath. This was not a stairway that wanted to hurry anyone along. It seemed to hum, quietly pleased to be remembered. As I descended, the melody threaded itself through my thoughts. I could see the rest of it now, as one sees a river's path by watching the way fog hangs over the valley. It looped back on itself in gentle patterns, not to confuse, but to comfort, like the repeats in an old lullaby sung to a child too sleepy to ask for a second verse. I glanced over my shoulder once and smiled at my own small habit. The way was clean and sure. Even the dust seemed to rest in curls, not webs. At the stairs end, there was a door made of light and music. That is the only way to name it. Its edges were as clear as the rim of a silver bowl, and yet it seemed to be woven from notes barely played, from echoes not yet heard. I held my breath because I wished to listen more than I wished to speak. The cord from my fingers fluttered out of the lute like a moth, brushed the brightness, and the door answered, shifting into a softer hue, like lamplight seen through linen. Elowen, the wood whispered again, no longer through the instrument alone, but from the door itself, as though the melody had learned my name and was delighted to practice it. And then, like the hush between two heartbeats, another name arrived. Lyra. Lyra. The sound rippled through me in that tender way a well-loved name does, even if it belongs to someone you have not yet met but already miss. "Are you here?" I asked, because questions are a form of respect. The door chimed, as if a spoon had gently touched crystal. I understood, not as speech, but as a comfortable certainty. Lyra was not behind the door, nor in front of it, but wound through the music itself, bound like gold thread in a tapestry. I pressed my palm to the light. It was not warm or cold, only kind. The door softened as a cloud dissolves, and beyond it lay a round chamber holding the peace of an old sanctuary. The ceiling arched as if it had practiced listening for centuries. Along the circular wall, murals slept in subdued colors. A ranger's silhouette against pines. A cleric's hand lifted in blessing. A wizard's paper-thin tower balanced on a star. A rogue laughing behind a half-mask. A bard with hair like a falling river. I stepped closer and felt the gentle tilt of the world, the way a boat leans when it remembers a current. The bard's face was mine, painted in strokes so light they might have been sighs. I touched the stone below the mural, and a breath of coolness met my fingertips. Not shock, not surprise. A feeling more like, yes, of course. The lute slipped into my hands as naturally as sleep slips over a tired traveler. I played a single note. The chamber caught it, tasted it, and returned it with a tender echo, as a mother might repeat a child's first word for the joy of it. Lyra's presence stirred like a hand brushing a curtain aside to look at morning. Not a ghost, not quite a spirit, a memory with its own music. I did not ask how. I have learned that in places where lullabies are stronger than locks, explanations walk at a calm pace and arrive when ready. "Will you show me?" I asked. The echo deepened, and the murals warmed by a shade. The ranger, perhaps someone from the long-ago tales of the high forest, perhaps someone whose name I once said at fireside, turned slightly toward the cleric whose silver holy symbol suggested a kindly moon. The wizard's tower brightened its star. The rogue's laughter seemed to tilt the mask, and the bard's painted mouth curved, a fraction in recognition. Images unfolded, not as scenes of thunder or danger, but as remembered evenings. A trail by starlight where pine needles made a quiet path, and our boots barely touched it. A campfire simmering with stew. A story told twice because we liked how it felt the second time. A dragon seen from a distance, scales not red or black, but the pale shimmer of frost at sunrise. The feeling that we had put something painful to rest, not with iron, but with gentleness. A cost we chose, in the way one chooses to set down a heavy basket and lose for a while the memory of what was inside, simply to give the arms a chance to rest. Lyra hummed a phrase that fit beneath my ribs. I echoed it. The phrase unfolded into the shape of a lullaby, and the chamber's door brightened, as if to say, "This way, when you wish." Not a demand, a promise that the path would open again when my heart was steady. I left the murals and sat on the floor, back against the warmest part of the stone. The lute rested in my lap like a sleeping bird. I thought of Candlekeep and the way pages turn as softly as moth wings. of water-deep streets exhaling themselves into evening, of names like Elminster and Tasha and Mordenkainen that drift through taverns like wind-borne seeds, sprouting tales wherever they fall. All of it felt distant as bells across water, and close, too, because stories are blankets we can pull up to our chin at any time. "Thank you," I told the chamber, and I meant it. Gratitude is another kind of key. The light at the door gentled to a resting glow. I stood, stretched the way one stretches before tucking into bed, and made my way back up the spiral. Each step found me as if it had been keeping my place. When I pushed the cellar door, the scent of tea leaves greeted me like a well-placed bookmark. Willa was setting a kettle to the simmer. "Found what you were looking for?" she asked, not turning yet. "Found what was looking for me," I answered. She nodded then, pleased, as if that were exactly the right order of things. "There's honey," she said, gesturing with her chin toward a little ceramic pot shaped like a sleepy bear. "And oat biscuits. They keep their kindness, even when they cool." I took tea and let the cup warm my fingers again. The old man wasn't in his corner, but on the wall beside his table hung a small sketch, charcoal on rough paper, of 5 figures, shoulders nearly touching. Someone had written just beneath, "Once, and perhaps again." I returned to my window table. Outside, the village wore the lightest shawl of mist. I tuned the lute, but softly, as if it were already almost exactly itself. "Lyra," I said, just to feel the name again. The string nearest my heart answered with a contented hum. "No hurry," it seemed to say. "There is time enough to remember." I gazed at the door to the cellar and felt it gaze back, kindly, patiently, as one might regard a friend knitting something warm for winter. The day could go on above while, below, a melody kept its vigil. I smiled and took a bite of biscuit. Kindness, even when cool. Night likes to return to places that welcome it. The Emberlight has a way of laying out a soft rug for the dark and lighting it with a handful of patient stars. By the time the lanterns were trimmed and the last chairs set upon tables like gentle-handed roosts, I had played until my fingers hummed and the tavern itself seemed to sway in a barely there waltz. Willa wished me good rest and pressed into my hand a sprig of lavender. "For your pillow," she said. "Lavender remembers calm even when we forget." I carried the scent upstairs and let it steep into the room. The quilt was already warm where the afternoon sun had napped. I set the lute in its accustomed place and blew out the candle. Moonlight walked across the floorboards as if they were a cool stream bed. I lay down, sliding into the bed's embrace the way a bookmark slides into a well-loved chapter. Dreams came early, but they did not pounce. They gathered like kindly old cats and settled themselves in the corners, purring softly until I was ready to notice them. When they rose and padded closer, I found myself at the top of the spiral again, yet it felt gentler, quieter, as if rendered in down and linen. I stepped onto the first stair, and my bare feet sank into a softness that was not truly there, and yet comforted me. The stone remembered my shape. The stair carried me like a lullaby carries a child, not swiftly, not slowly, just right. I could hear, far above, the Emberlight's rafters ticking as they released the day's warmth. Below, a breath as distant as winter thunder stretched and settled. I realized, with that peculiar serenity that dreams know how to provide, that the breath did not belong to anything dangerous. It belonged to something old and weary that preferred gentleness to noise. The door of light waited, woven of unsounded notes and the tender hush between them. In Dream, it was easier to see the music braided through it, threads of melody, threads of quiet, threads of listening. "Lyra," I said, and the door brightened as silk brightens when smoothed. I placed my palm upon it and felt, beneath the softness, the firm, calm strength of an oath well kept. Beyond lay the round chamber, the murals breathing a little deeper than before. The painted ranger looked toward a horizon I could not see. The cleric's hand cupped a mote of light the size of a seed. The wizard's star was now a moon, and the rogue's mask leaned against a tankard as if laughing with it. The bard, myself, touched a lute whose strings were painted so delicately I could almost hear them. I smiled and, by habit more than decision, sat on the floor with my back to the warm stone. The dream did not press me for anything. It only waited, making room. I let the lute rest against my knees and traced the curve of its body with my fingertip, as though following the shoreline of a quiet lake. "What did we sing?" I asked the chamber, or perhaps I asked the dream of the chamber. What did we place upon the world that the world might sleep without fear? Lyra's answer began as a vibration in the hollow of the instrument, then spread to the room like the scent of bread from an oven. A phrase, then another. I echoed them. A small cadence like a blessing before a meal. A longer phrase like two friends deciding, without saying so, to walk for a while in the same direction. I realized with a gentle wonder that did not surprise me as much as it soothed me, that the song was built for peace, not victory. It shaped breath. It collected scattered thoughts and laid them in order, as one rearranges pillows to ease the neck. The murals softened into memory, and memory softened into story. I saw us, my companions and I, on a field of frost where the grass chimed softly underfoot. The dragon was there, yes, but not as fear. It was the size of a small hill, and the slow, wistful blink of its eyes reminded me of a grandfather watching snowfall, remembering winters long gone. We sang, not to bind it, not to break it, but to offer it rest. The way the melody turned, the way the harmony gathered in the hollow between notes. It was as if we were laying down quilts, one atop another, until the cold could no longer reach. The cost rose gently, like mist off a pond at sunrise. Memory in exchange for peace. Not stolen, but set upon a shelf high enough that we would not bruise ourselves reaching for it every day. I saw my own face tilted toward the dragon, felt the hush of tears, not of sorrow, but of relief. Then I felt the touch of my friend's hands on my shoulders, and knew, beyond doubt, that we had chosen together. In the dream, I heard, as clearly as a kettle beginning to sing, a single promise. When the world is restless once more, we will remember together. I woke with wet lashes and a smile already forming. Dawn had not yet pressed its pink thumb against the horizon. The lavender on the pillow layered the air with calm. I slid from bed and went to the window. The village streets were ribbons of pearl. Somewhere, in the hedges, a small bird practiced one perfect note over and over until it liked how it felt. I carried the lute downstairs and found the common room empty, but for Willa, who was drawing curtains with the slow elegance of a morning ritual. She looked at me the way one looks at someone returning from a long bath, refreshed, a little dewy. "You've been where the Emberlight keeps its quiet," she said. It wasn't a question. "Thank you for letting me," I answered. "The Emberlight lets those who let themselves," she returned, and the corners of her mouth folded into a secret smile. I played softly as the first patrons wandered in, their footsteps drowsy, their talk gentle. No one asked for anything specific. They didn't need to. The melody wanted to be the sort that pours like warm tea, that fills the cup close to the rim without ever spilling. I thought of names I had heard in other taverns. Volo insisting on a detail that made a story more fun to tell, if less true. A monk from Candlekeep who swore the quiet there could be shelved and borrowed like a book. I let those names drift by, like motes in a sunbeam, not grasping at them, simply pleased to see them again. Toward evening, the old man returned to his corner and raised his mug as though he and I had agreed upon a time. "Close enough for tonight?" I asked him with a grin I felt mostly in my eyes. He sipped, nodded. "Close enough," he said, "until the next verse decides to be found." That night, when sleep came, it found me already at the dreaming door, and the door already opening, not as command, but as courtesy. Lyra threaded her warm silver tone through the opening bars of the song, and I followed, one breath after another, as one follows a friend into a familiar room lit by firelight, where conversations pause just long enough to let you sit, tuck your feet under you, and be at home. Morning in the Emberlight likes to start with a soft rehearsal of sounds, the teacups chiming as they nest in one another, the broom kissing the floor in tidy strokes, the crackle of kindling coaxed to fire. I waited until those small symphonies found their groove and then slipped back downstairs, through the door, down the spiral, carrying with me a basket lined with a cloth and filled with oat biscuits and slices of mild cheese. Comfort travels better when shared. The chamber felt brighter, not in the way of glare, but in the way of recognition. The murals seemed to have leaned a tiny bit closer, as if they had noticed their names forming again in the air. I didn't speak them aloud. Names have their own timetables. I only greeted them with the hospitality my mentors taught me. Food set gently on flat stone, a song hummed under the breath, the delight of company unburdened by expectation. The ranger first, broad-shouldered, pine-scented, even in paint, held a posture that evoked the high forest, or perhaps a grove on the outskirts of Cormanthor, where the leaves sip moonlight. I thought, Thalan, and the name folded itself into silence as neatly as a handkerchief into a pocket. The cleric's half-smile carried the blessing of Saloon, or something like it, a lunar kindness. I wondered if we once called her Miriel, or Mira for short, when laughter made us casual. The wizard was spare and careful in line, but I sensed glee under the ink, the sort of joy that comes from translating the sky into symbols. Kaldor, or another name with bells in it. The rogue's eyes, even sketched, were bright and kind, never cruel. Their half-mask looked like a joke shared with a mirror. Finch, perhaps, light-footed and fond of pockets for the safekeeping of lost buttons and found secrets. And the bard, the one that looked like me, wore, in paint, an expression I recognized from any mirror I have ever approached in lamplight. Curiosity softened by contentment. Elowen, I told myself, and smiled at the peculiar pleasure of naming. Lyra's tone drifted along the chamber's curve like a ribbon unwinding from a spool. I answered with the first phrase of the lullaby, then the second. The third reached toward that silver thread, the one I still couldn't tie, and instead of forcing the knot, I let the phrase hang, as one hangs a shawl over the back of a chair, trusting it will still be there later. The chamber approved. I felt its satisfaction as clearly as a purr. Once, I said to the murals, we chose to place our story in a safe place, the way a mother puts a book on the mantle where tiny hands can't smudge it. We said, we will open it again when the world asks as gently as we sang. The world is beginning to ask. My voice did not echo. The room drank every syllable and glowed. Later, with the basket emptier and my strings sweetly tired, I rested my head against the stone. Memory is not a single door, I thought. It is a house with many doors, and each one opens onto a room that smells faintly of something we once loved. Pine gum on fingertips, clean wool, fresh ink, toasted oats. When the time is kind, the right door opens without any knocking at all. I dozed there, half wrapped in waking. In that soft fold, the faces in the murals seemed to move just a little more. Thalon inclined his head in the habit he had when listening to owls. Miriel's fingers made the shape of a prayer that blessed bread and brave small choices. Calder's eyes sparkled with mischief the way only a careful person's eyes can when they let themselves. Finch winked, then pretended not to have winked, which made the wink twice as friendly. And my painted self, well, she looked like someone who had learned that rest is not an admission of weakness, but a declaration of trust. I sat up slowly, stretched, and let the air move through me like a tide smoothing sand. I will come again, I told them, in that voice one uses for sleeping children, so the words will not startle. The door responded with a faint chiming, a lullaby's way of saying, until then. When I reached the top of the stair, the common room had filled in with the gentle bustle of a late morning. A pair of students, one with an ink-smudged sleeve, one with a string bag of books, sat near the window, arguing softly about whether Candlekeep scones truly improved the clarity of the mind, or simply improved one's mood enough to think the mind clearer. A merchant from Waterdeep negotiated with the cat about who owned the sunny spot near the fire. Willow was teaching a young helper how to draw foam into a little heart on a cup of cinnamon milk. The old man lifted his mug in my direction. I returned the salute with the lute's neck. He beckoned me closer. You have that look, he said. The one people wear when the past has gone from being heavy to being warm. I laughed under my breath. Do I? You do, he affirmed. It suits you. What was it called? I asked him lightly, as if we were teasing bread apart to see the steam. The song for putting a dragon to bed. He cocked his head. Depends who you asked, he replied. Some called it the winter quilt, others the gentle chain. My favorite was the breath between. He tasted the last phrase as though it were a nice word to keep in the mouth a while, like caramel. The breath between, I said, feeling how it settled. He nodded. A lullaby knows that what matters is not only sound, but the space that permits the next sound to arrive. That evening, I played to a room that didn't need to know anything, and thus knew everything it needed. I did not perform. I kept company. The notes were chairs pulled closer to the fire. The chords were blankets, fresh from a line that had held them to the wind. When I finally went to my room, the the lavender had kept its promise. I lay down and listened as the Emberlight and I matched our breathing again. Somewhere far below, an old, vast presence breathed too, and the three of us made a choir of rest, humming to each other. The simple news that we were here, and that here, for now, was exactly enough. Evening laid its velvet palm over the village, and the Emberlight answered with small, faithful flames, each lantern a little hearth, each hearth a reminder that warmth need not make a sound to be known. I let the door to the cellar lean shut behind me and stood, listening to the hush gather itself like a shawl about the shoulders of the round chamber. The murals breathed in their soft way. The lute settled against my hip, a familiar weight, like a book I had read so many times I no longer needed to see the words to feel them. Lyra's tone found me before I struck a string, a ribbon of sound, silver and tender, circling the chamber at a pace that suited the heart. I followed with a simple phrase, no flourish, no urgency, just the melodic equivalent of laying out a place setting for an old friend. The notes went out, touched the stone, and returned changed only in that they had learned the room's kindness. I brought something, I told the listening light, opening a small pouch. Inside, folded like a letter, was a fragment of parchment with a bit of a tune written in a hand that used to be mine and might be mine again. A descending line that felt like a sigh released without regret. I could not remember when I had copied it, only that I had found it pressed into the lining of my case, where it must have waited through rain, laughter, and miles. When I played it, the chamber received the phrase as though it recognized an old neighbor by the sound of their footsteps. The murals warmed. The ranger, Tharlan, as my heart had decided, tilted his head as if listening for owls in a distant copse. Miriel's painted palm cupped light until it became a small, serene moon. Calder's star sprinkled a little mischief over his ink. Finch's half-mask gleamed like a wink shared with a candle. The bard, my painted self, looked as though she had just remembered the punchline to a gentle joke and would tell it only when the room was ready to laugh softly with her. I sang the words that had returned with the melody, shaping them in a voice as quiet as dust settling on a windowsill. When roads forget their names, may your feet remember home. When nights grow wide and hollow, may your breath be not alone. The lines landed like feathers near a sleeping cat, noticed, approved, but not allowed to disturb the nap. Lyra's response gathered in the hollow of the lute. I felt it under my fingers before I heard it in my ears. A hush shaped into music, as if silence had braided itself with sound and asked to be carried. It was then I understood. The lullaby was not only for a dragon, it was for the part of any of us that went wandering too long and needed a soft hand to turn the pillow and smooth the cool side against the cheek. It was the song for remembering how to rest. Who else heard you? I asked. Because questions are gentle lanterns. The murals answered in the language of small changes. A leaf painted behind Tharlan looked as if it had just turned, flashing its pale underside. Miriel's silver symbol brightened the way dew brightens when dawn promises to arrive on time. Calder's star bent, not downward or upward, but closer, as if he wanted to examine our moment for the joy of understanding. Finch's mask tipped toward the basket on the floor, where oat crumbs promised good company. I closed my eyes and let the Emberlight's deep hush rise from under the floor of the world. Somewhere up above, chairs would be stacked and unstacked. Willa would be chalking a list of warm things in a careful hand, stew, bread, cinnamon milk, rest. Below, Lyra unspooled the lost verses, not demanding I remember, only offering to walk beside me while I did. The first lost verse tasted of pine and long, even strides. Thalen's part. It traced the shape of a path you could follow by breath alone, each inhale stitched to the scent of resin and earth, each exhale stroking the understory with thanks. The second verse carried Miriel's warmth, blessing the space between notes so that even the quiet parts felt accompanied. The third belonged to Kaldor. It counted stars not to command them, but to join their patient rhythm, an arithmetic of kindness. The fourth was Finch's, a laugh folded gently into melody, the way one folds a letter you intend to keep in your pocket, so the edges round and the paper learns your shape. The fifth was mine. It did not stand apart. It wove the others into something you could set upon a great ancient chest and say, "There, sleep now." I opened my eyes to find the chamber waiting without impatience. I tuned a hair's breadth, polishing the intonation the way one smooths a sheet before slipping beneath it. The chords bloomed, soft as lamplight through linen, and I sang the verses one by one. No crescendo, no heroics, only the sure, low glow of a hearth tended for hours by someone who loves the people who will sit beside it. Images arrived not as visions to jolt, but as memories to cradle. A campsite near the Dezarin where the river spoke in its sleep. The outline of a harper pin resting on a rock, left there on purpose. A signal among friends that all was well. Candlekeep's high walls, appearing out of sea fog like a promise. A monk with ink-stained fingers offering a cup of tea steeped just a beat longer than usual, because he had noticed my voice was dusty. Waterdeep's rooftops buttoned up under new snow. In an alley, a single paw print that belonged to no dog I could name, but warmed me with the notion that some legends visit quietly, leave a sign, and pass on without asking for our awe. A name, Gwenhwyvar, drifting by like a leaf on a winter brook, not stopping, just letting me smile. The lullaby gathered all of it and put it where it could be safe even from longing. Lyra hummed approval, and the door gave one soft chime, as if someone had touched the rim of a glass bowl with a wet finger, and then let the tone fade rather than play it again. I had the feeling one gets when laying a quilt over sleeping shoulders, that the essential thing had been done and the rest would take care of itself. I did not notice I had begun to cry until a tear reached my lip and tasted faintly of the sea. That made me laugh under my breath, which made another tear fall, and somehow those two small drops arranged themselves into something like gratitude. The chamber, ever polite, pretended not to notice, and in that courtesy, I felt seen better than attention could have made me. "Will you keep them safe?" I asked, until the world asks as gently as we sang. The murals seemed to lean into their own colours. Thalen's pine darkened a shade. Miriel's moon tucked itself into a cradle of clouds. Kaldor's script flared and then calmed. Finch's mask found the precise angle that meant yes, and the bard's mouth curved that fraction more. I packed the loot as one tucks a child after a story. Not to trap, only to tell the instrument that the day's roaming was done. I left the basket's last biscuit for Finch. Some habits are persistent, even if their origins are stored on high shelves, and climbed the spiral. The Emberlight received me with the gentle astonishment of a room that never insists you explain yourself. Willa slid a cup of cinnamon milk toward me, and did not ask what the world had told me, only let the steam crown my face with spice. Before sleep, I wrote a line on a scrap. When roads forget their names, may your feet remember home. I pressed the scrap into the loot case where another time, another Elowen would find it and consider it a gift from her own good future. Then I lay down, and the tavern and I practiced breathing together until the breath beneath the village, old, vast, patient, joined us. And the three of us told the dark the same story. That we were here, that rest had arrived, that nothing more was required. Dawn tiptoed over the thatch with the soft sound of flour sifted into a bowl. I woke to the pocket sky of pale blue on the window pane, and the scent of bread making a quiet promise in the ovens down the lane. Lavender had kept its oath on my pillow. I rose, put on a shawl, and let the morning's cool lips kiss my cheeks, before the emberlight's inside warmth invited me back into itself. Today, the chamber felt different, not brighter or dimmer, but with a kind of depth that made my footsteps sound as though they were stepping into a memory already waiting with the kettle on. The door of light greeted my palm like a book that falls open to the right page. Inside, the murals seemed freshly washed. The ranger's pines held a blue hint of far mountains. Miriel's moon wore a faint ring, as though a halo, the kind that sometimes graces winter nights. Calder's star had the smallest tail, like a comet that chose to travel no faster than the heartbeat of a sleeping village. Finch's mask cast a playful shadow shaped a bit like a cat's paw. My painted self's gaze was steady, unstartled. Lyra's voice this morning was lower, closer to the ground. It moved like wind through reeds, making music because it could, not to prove a point. I tuned down a thread, loosening the strings until the lute sighed in relief, and laid my thumb to the bass as a potter might lay a hand on clay, feeling for the way it wishes to become. "Show me," I asked, and I meant, show me softly. The chamber obliged, and the memory unfurled not on the wall, but in the air like steam rising from a bowl of soup set down in winter. Cold came first, but not the cruel kind. This was the clean, honest cold of new snow, a chill that makes breath visible so that you can see the poem your lungs have been writing all along. We stood, 5 of us then, on a frost field, stitched with grass that sang tiny glass songs under our boots. The dragon lay ahead, immense and weary, not coiled to strike but folded into itself the way an old blanket folds when it knows exactly how to keep warmth where it belongs. Its scales were not any color I had ever given to fear. They were the white of pearls found under river stones, and the grey of dove wings where they shade themselves. When the wind passed over them, a faint shimmer ran along its sides, like moonlight travelling patiently across a floor to where a child sleeps. Its breath rose in clouds slow enough to think inside of. I felt the old sensation in my chest that I had named courage when I was younger, and now called by a simpler word, willing. We stepped forward together. Thalin's boots pressed prints into the frost that looked like careful signatures. Miriel's hood held a dusting of snow, and her hand made that small blessing I will always love, the one that marks not warriors or kings, but travelers who mean no harm. Calder's fingers rearranged the air as if the morning were a chalkboard that wanted a better equation for beauty. Finch's smile was the one you wear when entering a library you adore, full of mischief and reverence in equal parts. We did not speak. The dragon's eyes opened. They were not flames. They were deep wells. I felt, with a clarity that made my bones quiet, that it had listened to the world long enough to collect both the stories that made people safe and the ones that made them lonely. It blinked once, and the membrane that crossed its eye was like a soft curtain being drawn, and then opened again, making the pearly field of the morning shine a fraction more. If this had been another tale, perhaps someone would have shouted a name of power, or raised a banner, or declared a lineage. We did none of that. I laid the lute against my ribs and shaped the first chord as one shapes a bedtime. Thalan breathed in at the same time and let his breath out in a way that harmonized. Miriel hummed a note that could have been the sound of a prayer if prayers spoke in tones rather than words. Kaldor aligned his palms, and I swear to you, the spaces between his fingers glowed with the golden arithmetic of kindness. Finch brushed his thumb on the edge of my instrument and found a secret string, a subtle wire running under the bridge that only old friends know how to touch. We sang the breath between. Even now, in this chamber, I felt how the first verse placed a pillow under a heavy head, how the second tucked the blanket near a shoulder, how the third turned down a corner to let a hand slide underneath, how the fourth smoothed the sheet and asked if there was anything else needed, how the fifth promised to sit right there a while and keep watch. No binding, no banishing, only this, the creation of a room where rest could happen without fear. As the verses folded over the dragon, its breath slowed to match the tavern's and mine, that threefold choir practicing again what it had learned to do in the dark. Snow still fell in a language we could not read, but felt the meaning of. Now, here, enough. The dragon's eyes softened, and moisture gathered at their edges. The way, once, you have seen a father stand in a doorway and watch his children sleep and think that no one sees him, and let his guard down just enough to turn to water for a heartbeat. The cost arrived without ceremony. It never bargained. It simply waited until we noticed its hand extended, and then asked us to decide what courtesy demanded. Peace, in exchange for the titles of our memories, the names that would let us call back specifics with speed. We would keep the feelings, the muscle memory of trust and song, the willingness to meet sorrow with quiet. We would lose the catalogue. We would remember together, someday, or not at all. Miriel looked at me, and her eyes were so calm that I felt my own heart find the tempo it had wanted all along. Thalan nodded in that way that says the forest approves. Kaldor wrote a little symbol in the air that I did not understand at the time, but now recognize as a sigil for let this be woven. Finch made a face I cherished then and cherish now. The one that says, "Is there any other way we'd rather spend ourselves?" I touched the strings and said yes. The dragon exhaled a breath as rich as bread steam. Its eyelids lowered, lifted once, looking at us with what I choose to call blessing, and lowered again to stay. The frost field took a deeper glitter, as if relieved of something it had been holding. We stood because standing has dignity, and sleeping things deserve dignity, and we waited until the snow wrote a soft sheet over the dragon's flanks. Then we turned, not to leave, but to begin keeping watch in the way that the living do, by carrying the right weight and setting down the wrong, by choosing warmth when it is possible and refusing cruelty when it is not. The memory folded itself like linen placed back in a chest, and the chamber returned, patient as ever. I found I had been breathing in time with the remembered dragon, and that my hands, without my asking, were stroking the curved back of the lute in slow, even passes, the way one strokes a hound whose bones ache on rainy days. "Thank you," I said to Lyra, to the murals, to the morning, to the dragon, whose name I still did not know, but whose breath I could match when I wished to be braver than I felt. A faint scent of iron, old bells, cool stone, joined the warmer smells of polished wood and the ghost of apples, as if the chamber were reminding me that strength and softness share the same house when the house is built well. On my way up the spiral, I paused at the wall and laid my palm there. The stone had a heartbeat today, slow and definite. I thought of Candlekeep's gates, of a palimpsest I had once seen, where the old writing showed through the new like grandparents smiling behind their grandchildren. I thought of a laugh heard in a water-deep square that reminded me of Finch so specifically that I had turned and expected to see that half-mask and the hat that never quite sat straight. I smiled into the stone, and the stone, I am certain, smiled back in its geological way that takes 1,000 years to finish a single grin. Willa was polishing a brass ladle to the shine of a small sun when I stepped into the common room. She watched the reflective surface for a breath to make sure it had learned how to be bright, and then looked up at me. "You visited the sort of morning that leaves footprints on your soul," she said. "It will track in a little snow," I replied, "but we can lay down rugs." She nodded. "We keep extras." By midday, a gentle rumour had begun among the village folk. Not of dragons, not of adventurers, not of songs with power. Only this, that the Emberlight felt particularly restful today, as if the chairs had learned how to hold people better, as if the cups had learned how to keep tea warm to the last, as if the light had figured out how to sit on shoulders the way a shawl knows the shape of an evening. I played a few tunes that sounded like windows left just barely ajar for the night air, like boots drying near a fire, like the quiet clink of a spoon in a bowl. People stayed a little longer than they planned, and left saying the same thing in different words. I didn't know I needed that. As dusk laid its first palm upon the thatch, I took the lute back to my room and placed it on the blanket folded at the foot of the bed. I opened the window and let the cool in. From somewhere nearby, a child laughed the way bells laugh, high and brazen and infinitely kind. Far away, too far for anyone but a bard over listening for comfort's sake, a sound rose that might have been wind through a deep place, or might have been the slow, steady breath of something old remembering how to sleep. I sat on the floor, leaned my head against the bedstead polished by hands gentler than mine, and breathed with it. In, out, in, out. The Emberlight found me in that rhythm, and the night came in politely, checked if I had enough blankets, and then tucked itself around the eaves. When my eyes closed, they did so not as gates, but as curtains that let the rest of the house take its quiet evening. Evening arrived as a kind visitor, taking off its boots at the door and laying its coat carefully across the chair. The Emberlight accepted it with a steady glow, lantern by lantern, as if the tavern were lighting small moons to float at shoulder height. I sat by the window with my lute unlatched and a cup of cinnamon milk warming my palms. Outside, the village of Dunrow stitched itself into twilight, the tailor's candle, the baker's back door opening like a yawn, the soft hush of broom bristles, persuading a stoop to be tidy. Everything wore that gentle readiness that belongs to night when night remembers to be kind. Lyra's presence twined through the instrument, a silver filament of feeling rather than speech, and for a long while it seemed enough to sit and breathe with it. Yet beneath the quiet, something tremored the way a thought tremors just before it gathers words. At first I mistook it for a wagon passing 2 streets over, or for the broad yawn of a beam settling into its old honesty. Then the spoon in my cup quivered once, bright against porcelain, and steadied. I looked toward the cellar door, and the door looked back the way a loved book looks from a shelf when your eye passes over it. Patient, inviting, not insistent. Down the stair, the air cooled into that pleasant cellar chill that makes apples sleep well and keeps secrets supple. The door of light opened on the chamber, with the ease of a lullaby finding its chorus. The murals breathed. The ranger's pines deepened their green. Miriel's small moon wore a halo like frost. Caldor's star traced an arc more sure than before. Finch's mask tipped in greeting. My painted self watched with the serenity one learns from long friendship with silence. The tremor was there too, a soft thrum below hearing, as if the earth were humming to remind itself of a melody learned long ago. "I feel it," I said, and the stone warmed under my hand to let me know it felt it too. Lyra's tone, lower tonight, closer to the chest, wove into my breath. It did not warn, it did not instruct. It simply invited me to lean closer to the heart of things and listen as one listens at the crib of a child who has turned in sleep. I began with the gentlest chords I own, those soft shapes that let the wood speak before the string. The sound moved like lamplight through linen, touching the door, tasting the curve of the wall, coming back to rest in my lap. A picture loosened from the stone, not a vision bright enough to startle, only a memory arriving in warm wool. Snowfields, blurred now by time's kind hand. A hill shaped like a shoulder. The impression of scales like stacked river stones catching moon. And there, beneath it all, a breath widening slightly, as if a sleeper, sensing a draft, drew the blanket closer in. The world, I thought, has begun to talk in its sleep. The tremor shivered again, barely, through the floor of the chamber and up into the bones of the lute. Not danger. Sorrow, perhaps. Or the memory of sorrow. I let the melody dip its head, the way one does at the threshold of a sanctuary, and added a line I had not played since, well, since before memory bothered to count the days. A little descending figure, soft as snow, sliding from a low bough. The tremor lessened. In its place, a kind of yearning rose, quiet, ancient, like a river remembering its spring. Is the dragon dreaming of loneliness? I asked the room, surprised to hear the question in my own voice because the answer had already bloomed in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Lyra answered with a chord tucked so close to silence it needed my pulse to hold it up. Yes, it seemed to say, but not the sharp loneliness that wounds. The old kind that arrives at dusk when you realize you have gone most of a day without speaking aloud and find you miss the sound of your own kindness. I tightened one string, a whisper's width, and played the first verse of The Breath Between. The chamber listened the way winter listens when you open a door and warm air goes out like a greeting. On the mural, Thalen's head inclined a degree more, the posture of someone hearing a branch touch a window. Miriel's painted mouth rounded a hint, shaping the word rest. Caldor's star wrote itself a subtler path, one that would take the long way home on purpose. Finch's mask cast a shadow like a cat curled on a cushion, paws tucked, tail a question mark of contentment. My painted self still watched, patient as a hearth. From somewhere deeper than the chamber, below the spiral, below the Emberlight's foundations, below the old river stones that paved Dun Row, when Dun Row was still figuring out where to put its lanes, a sound rose, so slow and low that the ear could not keep it without the heart's help. It was not a roar. Roars have edges and teeth. This sound was round and steady, the breath of a creature vast and vulnerable, the way all sleepers are vulnerable, open, trusting, given for a time to the guardianship of those who choose watch over wakefulness. "I remember you," I said, though I could not say whether I meant the dragon or the breath, or the version of myself who once laid that breath into rest like a quilt. I remember the way the field glittered, and how the cold was clean, and the moment the air grew soft because it believed us. The tremor answered with a subtle warming that rose through my feet to my knees, as though a great stove far below had been fed a fresh stick of birch and approved of the seasoning. A question arrived then, not from Lyra, not from the murals, not even from the breath. It came from the hush itself, the way stillness sometimes asks you, gently, if you would like to speak to someone you miss. Would you call them? Not to wake, but to stand nearby, the way you open a door and let a friend lean against the jamb while you finish a small task, just so you can hear each other breathe. I looked to the murals and found my answer waiting in paint. Tharlan, Miriel, Caldor, Finch, old companions whose names settled now on my tongue like warm bread, did not step free. That is not how this chamber does its work. But I felt, unmistakably, the nearness of the people those names meant. Not phantoms, not echoes, nearness. The sense that if I said a line we once laughed over, Finch would make the face that meant he remembered the exact line break. That if I hummed a cadence we used to find our way back to each other in crowded rooms, Miriel would answer with harmony as natural as breath. That if I left a space where a clever hand might slip in a counter-melody, Caldor would fill it with the respectful mischief of someone who knows that music is a conversation. That if I paused after the second verse to listen to the wind in metaphorical pines, Tharlan would name 3 more subtle sounds hiding inside the first. "I would call you," I whispered, and the chamber warmed as if a dozen small candles had been lit at once in corners I had not noticed. I touched the strings and played our road-finding phrase. 3 notes and a rest, then 2, then a held breath to see who was listening. The quiet answered as quiet always answers when it is loved, by giving back exactly what it receives and just a fraction more. The tremor eased again, and in its place I felt a different movement, not shaking, but turning, as when a sleeper rearranges the blanket to find the cool seam with their toes, as when a great heart that has been alone too long decides to trust the dark a little further. The dragon was not waking. It was rolling deeper into sleep, like a ship slipping from shoal to channel. Still, the world above must have felt the shift. In the tavern overhead, a mug chimed its lip against a shelf. A lantern's glass rang a single soft note. Somewhere under the floor, the cat changed chairs without waking fully and made a satisfied sound like a vowel-shaped purr. Willa later would say she felt a kindness pass through the building, the way a breeze passes through curtains in summer, and thought no more of it than one thinks of a friend's hand brushing one's shoulder in a crowd. I sat a long time, playing almost nothing, only the promise between notes that something tender was being tended. At last, the breath below steadied to that comforting rhythm we had learned together. Tavern, bard, dragon, 3 long phrases laid one over the other until they matched. Lyra's tone softened to a thread, then to a shimmer. "Thank you," I said, "to whatever part of the world hears such things and keeps them safe." Thalon smiled, stringing his bow not for war but for harmony. He drew it gently across the air, and the sound was like wind through the tallest trees. Miriel's voice followed, low and serene, each note a candle flame. Kaldor raised his hands and traced sigils in the air, shaping sound from light. The runes spun into chords that drifted like golden dust. Finch whistled under his breath, a bright, playful counterpoint that made even the stone seem to grin. And I, Eloin's Starcrest, bard of the long-forgotten song, began to play. The melody wound through us all like shared breath. Every note bloomed into warmth, and the warmth became light, and the light became memory. I saw flashes, moments from ages past, folding into the air like pages turning themselves. Our campfires, our laughter, the dragon's peaceful gaze, the promise we made. Lyra's voice wove through it all, a golden thread that bound the harmonies together. "Do you hear it?" she whispered. "Not to me alone, but to the earth itself. Do you hear how love remembers its own shape?" The stone beneath us trembled once, gently, an exhale, not a warning. And then came the softest sound I have ever heard, a sigh so deep it seemed to come from the roots of the world. The dragon's breath. It was listening. We played on, not with power, but with devotion. Each note said, "You are safe." Each harmony said, "You are loved." Each silence between said, "You may rest again." The murals glowed until the chamber became a dawn all its own. The dragon's sigh deepened, slow and even, falling once more into true sleep, peaceful and sure. When the final chord faded, there was no applause, no great flash of magic, only the small, sacred stillness that follows something whole. The kind of stillness that feels like the first moment after snowfall, quiet, clean, and full of possibility. Thalon bowed his head. "The song is complete." Miriel smiled. "And now the world will dream peacefully again." Kaldor's light dimmed to a shimmer, until it forgets once more. Finch tilted his mask. "And when it does, she'll be there to remind it." They looked to me, and I knew they meant me, the keeper of the melody, the bard of the breath between. Lyra's voice was soft now, like a lullaby fading into dawn. "Rest, Eloin. You have sung the song of reunion. The world breathes evenly again." I wanted to stay, to hold the moment forever, but the chamber's light began to dim, not in loss, but in love, as though it were tucking itself in. One by one, my friends turned back toward their murals, their faces serene, their forms dissolving into the paint with slow grace. Before Finch vanished completely, he glanced over his shoulder. "We'll always be listening," he said with a wink. And then I was alone again. Alone, but not lonely. The chamber glowed softly, its air rich with the scent of rain and pine. I touched my lute once more, its strings warm beneath my fingers. and whispered, "Thank you." As I climbed the stair, I felt the tavern breathe in rhythm with me. The world above was already stirring with dawn's first thoughts. The rain had stopped, and through the window I could see the faintest streaks of light painting the edges of the sky. The song of reunion was complete, but its echo would linger, woven into every quiet hearth, every gentle breath, every dream that ended with peace. And somewhere deep below the earth, a dragon slept soundly, listening still. The dawn came quietly to Dunrow, the kind that carries warmth without haste. Pale gold light settled on the windows of the Emberlight Tavern, painting soft halos on the wooden floor. Outside, dew hung like tiny lanterns on the grass, and a sleepy mist rolled over the hills, curling gently against the cobblestones. The world felt as though it had taken a long, deep breath, and for the first time in many lifetimes, it exhaled in peace. But in that peace, I felt something call, not with urgency, but with longing, like a final page asking to be read before the book could close. The song of reunion had been sung. My companions had returned to their quiet rest within the murals, their light warm and steady, their laughter echoing softly through the edges of my dreams. The dragons slept again beneath the earth, lulled by our melody. And yet, in the hush that followed, Lyra's voice remained. She spoke in the space between thoughts, a whisper just above the hum of the waking tavern. "Elowen," she said, gentle as twilight, "there is one verse left unsung." I froze, hand resting on the curve of my lute. "One more." "The last verse," she replied. "It belongs to you alone." The words lingered in the air like the first scent of rain. I understood then, not as revelation, but as remembrance. Every song I had ever known, every tale I had ever told, led here, the quiet note at the end of the melody that only the heart can play. I rose, wrapped my cloak about my shoulders, and made my way down the familiar stair. The tavern was empty now, except for the fire's slow murmur. Even Willa seemed to know that this morning was meant to belong to silence. She had left a candle burning by the cellar door, its flame steady and kind. The stair greeted me as it always did, each step a note in a familiar rhythm. Creak, hush, creak, hush. At the bottom, the chamber of murals glowed with a gentleness that felt alive. The painted light had softened to the hue of early dawn, as though it, too, awaited closure. Lyra's luminescence coiled above the floor in soft ribbons, hovering like dust caught in a sunbeam. "This is where it ends, my bard," she whispered, "and where it begins again." I knelt, placing my lute before me. The strings trembled faintly, not in fear, but in recognition. The wood seemed to breathe beneath my hands, alive with all the songs it had ever held. Around me, the murals began to shimmer, and I could see the faint outlines of my friends. Tharlan with his steady smile, Miriel bathed in silver calm, Calder's knowing eyes bright as morning stars, and Finch, his mask gleaming with that eternal mischief that always made sorrow easier to bear. They did not step forward this time. They simply watched, waiting. Lyra's tone drifted around me like wind stirring chimes. "This is not a song for dragons, nor for heroes," she said. "It is for you, Elowen's Starcrest, the one who remembers. It is the verse that releases the weight of remembering and lets love rest without loss. I closed my eyes and began to play. The melody started as a whisper, almost shy. Notes rolled out like gentle ripples on still water. Each one carried a piece of every song I'd ever played. The laughter of the Emberlight's hearth, the sigh of the forest's wind, the warmth of Willa's smile when she set down a cup. The world seemed to listen, leaning in closer. I felt the song open something deep within me. Memories rose, not sharp or painful, but tender. The first time I picked up a lute beneath the stars. The way my friends had laughed when the stew had burned but no one cared. The feeling of the dragon's breath against my skin, vast and calm. The first note I ever played for love, not glory. The melody deepened, weaving through me until I could no longer tell whether I was playing it or it was playing me. The music filled the chamber with light, soft, amber, and kind. The murals brightened one last time, and I heard them, my companions singing with me, their voices light and shimmering. They were not echoes now. They were real, joined in the song that would complete our story. Together, I whispered, tears warm on my cheeks. One final verse. The music swelled, not loud, but full. Thalen's harmony flowed like forest rain. Miriel's tones glowed like moonlight on water. Kaldor's notes rose and fell like wind around a tower. Finch's whistle danced between them, light as a promise kept. And Lyra, dear Lyra, wrapped us all in golden sound, weaving every thread into one eternal chord. The ground beneath us began to hum, a resonance so deep it seemed to come from the bones of the earth itself. The dragon stirred, not in fear or sorrow, but in understanding. Its vast presence unfurled beneath the tavern, an endless breath of warmth. I could feel it listening. Elowen, Lyra said softly, her voice now almost part of the music. Sing your farewell. I lifted my gaze, the light of the murals reflecting in my eyes, and let the words rise. Rest, and remember only peace. Bar. Rest, and let the dark be kind. Bar. The flame will wait, the song will keep. Bar. Until another heart will find. Bar. Beneath the stars, beneath the stone. Bar. Dream where the gentle echoes roam. Bar. You are not gone, you are home. The final chord lingered, trembling like candlelight. Then, one by one, the murals began to fade, not vanish, but soften into the stone, their colors dissolving into the calm of completion. My friends' faces smiled as they faded, their peace radiating like sunlight through mist. The light of Lyra's form drifted toward me, resting upon the strings of my lute. You have finished the song, Elowen, she whispered. The dragon sleeps in peace. The world remembers gently now. What will happen to you? I asked, my voice small. Lyra's tone was as soft as a sigh. I was the voice of the melody that guided you here. My part is done, but every time you play, every time someone listens with their heart, I will be there, in the spaces between the notes. I bowed my head. Then I will play often, and I will listen, she replied. With that, Lyra's light shimmered once more, and dissolved into the air like golden dust. The chamber glowed a final time, warm and full, then dimmed to the natural quiet of stone. I sat for a long while, the lute resting across my lap. My fingers moved over the strings in absent thought, not to make music, but to feel the pulse of the wood. The silence around me was complete, yet it was not empty. It was the fullness that comes after fulfillment, the space where peace resides. Eventually, I rose and carried the lute up the spiral stair. The tavern met me with the first light of morning. The fire had burned to embers, the kind that hold their heat long after the flames have gone. I could smell bread baking somewhere nearby, and a rooster called in the distance, a cheerful, ordinary sound that made me smile. I looked toward the cellar door, its latch gleaming faintly. "Sleep well," I whispered, though I wasn't sure whether I meant the dragon, my companions, or the song itself. Perhaps all three. The tavern creaked softly in answer, the sound like contentment. I took my cup of tea to the window and watched as the sky shifted from silver to gold. For the first time in longer than memory could reach, the horizon looked untroubled. The world below was still, resting easy. The dragon dreamed not of sorrow or war, but of warmth, the way a tavern feels when music fills it gently, and laughter hums between old friends. And in that light, I began to hum once more, not the song of binding, nor the lullaby of sleep, but the final verse, a song of thanks carried by morning wind. The breath between had ended, but peace, I realized, has no ending. The morning came on the hush of a sigh. The mist, tender as silk, draped itself over Dunrow's rooftops and wound lazily through the valley like a river of sleep that had forgotten to wake. From the eaves of the Emberlight Tavern, beads of dew fell in unhurried drops, catching sunlight as they went, small, perfect lanterns dissolving into day. Inside, the world held its breath in golden stillness. The fire had burned low in the hearth, its embers breathing a quiet pulse of red and amber, a heartbeat for the room. The wooden beams overhead hummed faintly as they warmed. The scent of last night's cider and cinnamon lingered in the air, gentle and sweet, like a story that refuses to fade completely. I sat in my usual corner by the window, my lute across my lap. The morning light reached through the glass, touching the strings in soft glimmers, as if the sun itself wanted to listen. Outside, the first sounds of the waking world drifted in. The sweep of a broom on stone, the splash of a pail in the well, the chirp of sparrows scolding the dawn for being too early. Peace had settled upon the tavern like a blanket that fits just right. Lyra's voice was gone now, folded back into the fabric of the world, but I could still feel her presence in the silence, the kind of silence that isn't empty, but full, as if someone had whispered goodbye so gently the word never quite left the air. And beneath it all, I felt the steady hum of something vast and content. The dragon's breath, slow and even. The rhythm of the deep earth's dreaming. No longer troubled, no longer lonely, just resting, the way mountains rest beneath their snow. I brushed a chord. It came out warm and low, a sound that filled the space between the heartbeats of the room. I let it linger. The lute, worn smooth from years of traveling and telling, sang back in kind. A quiet, glowing voice that seemed to understand that the best endings don't close. they dissolve softly into forever. The tavern seemed to listen with me. The beams creaked in approval. The windows sighed. Even the cat, an old grey thing with a tail like a soft question mark, curled up near my boots and began to purr in perfect time. For a moment, I imagined my friends here again, not as ghosts or memories, but as the warmth within every sound. Thalen's steady chuckle woven into the crackle of the fire. Miriel's calm smile reflected in the golden sheen of the teapot. Calder's wit flickering in the shadows near the shelves. Finch's laughter, light and teasing, hiding somewhere in the rafters, waiting to surprise me when I least expect it. And there was comfort in that. Perhaps stories never end, I thought. Perhaps they simply choose new places to rest. The dragon sleeps, yes, but the melody that soothed it now hums through every quiet moment in the world above, through the baker's whistle, the farmer's sigh, the hush of rain over rooftops. It is the song of kindness continuing, unseen and unspoken, but felt. I stood and walked to the window. The mist was lifting, revealing the hills that rolled away like a quilt tucked over the earth. The fields glimmered with morning dew, each drop catching sunlight and returning it softly, as though the land itself was giving thanks. The village stirred to life, slowly, gently. Doors opened. Kettles sang. The blacksmith's forge whispered smoke into the blue sky. And somewhere in that fragile symphony of waking, I heard something wonderful. Laughter. Real, ordinary laughter. It was then I realized that the Emberlight was no longer just a tavern at the edge of a small town. It had become something more. A keeper of peace. A sanctuary for weary hearts. A beacon for those who had forgotten the sound of gentleness. I took my lute and played, just for the morning, just for myself. A simple tune, the kind that makes children pause mid-step, and old men close their eyes for a breath longer than usual. It had no name. It didn't need one. It was the final verse, reshaped by dawn. The music drifted through the open window, mingling with the scent of bread and mist, and wandered out into the world. I imagined it traveling far, across rivers and meadows, through cities and forests, carrying the faint whisper of warmth to anyone who needed it. Perhaps someone, somewhere, would stop what they were doing for a moment, look up at the sky and feel, without knowing why, that all was well. I set the lute down on the table. The strings gave one last sigh and fell still. My fingers lingered against the wood, grateful for every note it had carried, every memory it had cradled. "Thank you," I whispered. To Lyra, to the dragon, to my friends, to the tavern itself. Thank you for letting me be part of the song. A soft breeze passed through the window, lifting a few strands of my hair and brushing against my cheek like a nod from an old friend. I smiled. The fire shifted one last time, releasing a single spark that danced up the chimney and out into the sky. Outside, the sun climbed gently, unhurried and sure. The mist vanished, leaving behind a world clean and bright, washed in gold. The hills glowed, the trees shimmered, and somewhere deep beneath it all, the dragon slept on, dreaming softly of warm light and bards' songs. I poured myself one more cup of tea, the kind that tastes faintly of honey and home, and watched the light spill across the tavern floor. The day had begun, the story was done, and peace, gentle, steady, endless, remained. If you ever find yourself at the edge of a quiet village and hear faint music drifting from an old tavern window, listen closely. You might just catch the melody of "In the Breath Between." It will sound like rest, like kindness, like home. And if you smile, even for a moment, then the song lives on,